Did you ever wonder what Scientology was like back in the 1950s when it first started with L. Ron Hubbard? Well, we have Ant Phillips back to tell more stories, including about the first communications course he did in London in 1956 with Mary Sue Hubbard, with L. Ron Hubbard supervising. We've also got some stories that Ant tells about L. Ron Hubbard Jr., otherwise known as Nibs, and later Ron DeWolf. Stay tuned. Aloha, everybody. Welcome to our channel, Scientology Peeling the Onion. My name is Mark Fisher. I'm here with my co-host, Janice Gillum-Grady. Good day, Janice.
Good day, Mark. Good day, everybody. I hope everyone's having a good day or even a good week or a good month.
You're getting ready to leave.
I'm getting ready to go on a cruise. I'm leaving in just over 24 hours, and I'll be gone for 21 days.
That's right. And you're gonna retrace your steps through the Panama Canal, right? That you did as a young girl?
I was 10 years old when I first went through the Panama Canal, so we'll see how it's changed over all these years.
That's great. That's great. Well, hopefully we'll get some reports and photographs and that type of thing when the trip's all over, and you'll have a safe journey. So I'm sure you're looking forward to that. Anyway, everybody, just to remind you, please subscribe to our channel, hit that like and notification button. We really appreciate it. We've got a second interview with our guest here. He was around in the early 1950s in Scientology in England, and also at Saint Hill in the 60s and around, and he's still around and kicking. He's 94 years old, I think, and we are really glad to have back Antony Phillips, otherwise known as Ant, and he's back to tell some more stories about Scientology in the 1950s and 60s. So without further ado, here he is, Ant Phillips. Good day, Ant.
Hi, Ant.
Hi.
How are you today?
Oh, I'm quite fine, thank you.
Good.
Is it nice over there in Denmark right now?
It's reasonable. It's mild weather sort of thing. We had a lot of rain a few days ago, but it's okay now.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah, you got a sweater on, and I'm like shirtless. I mean, sleeveless.
I always have a sweater on. We're not. The climate's okay with me, but I keep.
Okay.
Well, that's great. Well, we're going to carry on with your stories from Scientology in the 1950s. And I know you wanted to tell the story about the original communications course that you were on with Mary Sue Hubbard. Is that right?
Yeah.
Go right ahead.
Yeah, it happened either before or after Christmas in '56. And at that time there were no TRs, there were no communication drills and so forth. So there was this, Ron was going to try something out which he called dummy auditing. So they called them dummy auditing drills. And they're what we now know as TR1 to TR, well, they went to TR5, which has been dropped out. We didn't have confronting. We started off with that way, and what happened was that I can't remember how I got into it. I think I was out of work at the time, and but I stumped up money for it, and we went in every day to the normal hours. I think it was 9 to 5:30, and did these drills. And at present, the person who ran it was somebody called Rosina Mann, a woman who was not very tall, and Mary Sue was on it, and there was a friend of Mary Sue, Pegy Conway. There's Mary Sue. Pegy Conway was a friend of the family there, and she came every day. And Well, we ran the TRs.
Now,
So-
let me ask you a question, Ant. Were the TRs in those days, TR 1, 2, 3, did they use the Allison Wonderland book that
Yeah.
we did the communications course where
Yeah.
you would say like figgly wiggly or whatever, and that type of thing, right?
Oh.
No, I mean there were funny lines out of like when you were doing TR 1, right?
Off with her head.
Head.
Yes, that's Alice in Wonderland.
Yes.
Or Alice in Looking Glass, one of the two. I've got.
Yeah.
I had the book when I was a child, so I remember, but I don't quite remember how we worked. I think we had copies of the book.
And then did you have the same questions? Do birds fly? Do fish swim? Are those the same questions that they used back in those
Those were
days?
the same, yes.
Go ahead, Janice.
Yeah. And when the drills were done, did you have to do audit a doll?
Did I have to do it what?
Audit a doll. Remember on the
No.
no
We
dolls.
ordered. We went in pairs and did it, and switched. But there were no doll drills. Doll drills came a lot later.
Okay,
Yeah, and
probably
just-
for the gradient. To
Yeah.
cut the gradient back, put in a doll.
And just to explain for our viewers who never were in Scientology, when you're doing the training routines involve asking a question to somebody sitting across from you and getting an answer from them. So rather than using actual auditing processing commands that you would ask or questions you would ask, do birds fly or do fish swim? And then you would get an answer from the person. So that those were the common questions that you would ask over and over again until you could actually ask them and get a response from the person who was doing the drill with you. And then the Alice in Wonderland quotes were when you were TR1 was basically being able to communicate across a distance to somebody and have them understand what you're saying. And so again, they use the Alice through the looking glass or whatever quotes from that book, off with her head or whatever. There was a bunch of them. Some of them people who were longtime Scientologists will remember. I don't have them, after 50 years. I don't remember all of them. But anyway, that's what we were talking about. So go ahead, Ant.
Yeah. Well, that's right. We had the book and we opened it and took a bit out of it, and the idea was to get it through as good as possible, as normal as possible, to cut out some idiosyncrasies with some nervousness and this sort of thing, so it didn't disturb the person.
Right. Yeah. Another one was I'm late for a very important date.
Yeah.
Were there a lot of people on the communications course back then with Mary Sue and you? And
I think there was an even number, and I would think it would be 8.
Mm-hmm.
It was possibly 6, but it was either 6 or 8. And amongst them, there was this. Pegy Conway was a friend of the family of Hubbards, and she unfortunately died later. And I remember there was talk about it. That I think he mentioned in Ability that she was in trouble, but she didn't say anything. She was in case trouble, but she didn't say anything, and they didn't rescue her in time. And I think Hubbard felt a bit guilty suddenly that it wasn't spotted. But she was there, Pegy Conway. She was South African.
Mm-hmm. Now, I was going to ask you, Ant, was this at the Hazy location on Fitzroy that you did this course?
It's 37 Fitzroy Street. Yeah, that's right. That's the building.
That's a picture of it. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. It's taken later because you've got the post office tower behind it, and that was built later.
Right.
But that was,
and then
it was one of the. It was we had Hazy had 2 of those buildings, 2 of those entrances, number 35 and number 37, and we had on the first floor we had a training room which went over both sides, and above it we had auditing rooms, on one staircase. So
Mhm.
that was the stable home of Hattie, which was the name of Hubbard Association of Scientologists International, which was the name we went by.
Uh-huh.
Right.
This was in London, near Tottenham Court Road Station, so it was right in the centre of London. Well, London's big, so it's got a big centre.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I have another question for you. Was Hubbard there at the time while you guys were doing the TR's course and the communications course? Was he there as well?
Yes, yeah.
Would he come into the course room? Do you remember? Was he?
He never came into the course room. No.
Uh-huh.
I know that. What's the name? What's the woman's name? Rosina Mann went and talked to him in the evening.
Right.
With him.
Now, in those days, Nibs was very close to Hubbard, very involved. Did he ever check in on the course room or anything like that?
No, Nibs. What we're talking about there was before I went on staff in Hazzy. I didn't see Nibs until I came back from. I spent 6 months in the Scientology organization in Dublin, and when I came back, I did various jobs, and Nibs came in later.
Okay, just so everybody knows. Yeah. Nibs is L. Ron Hubbard Jr., and that was the oldest son of Hubbard. Do you have the other picture, Mark?
Yeah, I do.
That's from. Can you show? Yeah. So in this picture, I don't know who the gentleman on the right is, but that's Nibs there, and then the lady in the middle is his sister, Katie Gillespie.
Katie. Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's Katie.
I've never seen Katie.
Yeah, apparently that's Katie, and then that's Hubbard on the left. But both Nibs and Katie were from Hubbard's first wife.
Yeah.
And and Katie actually trained up to a Class 6 auditor. She's no longer around, and neither is Nibs. But she was a very close friend of my mother's.
Oh, yeah. Oh, okay.
Yeah. When my mom first moved to LA and set up Celebrity Center, she actually stayed with Katie, and Katie helped her out.
Oh, that's interesting, because I heard nothing about Katie.
Yeah. Well, funnily enough, in 1977, I was sent on a recruitment mission to get auditors in the LA area, and Katie's name was on the list. And it hadn't clicked to me that it was Katie Hubbard's daughter. And I called Katie and had a whole conversation with her. And she's like, "Janice, don't you remember who I am?" And I'm like, "No." And she says, I'm Ron's daughter. I'm like, "Oh."
Also, I just wanted to mention too, L. Ron Hubbard Jr. His nickname was Nibs, right? Which we're talking about here.
Yeah.
He later, of course, he and Hubbard had a falling out, and eventually, L. Ron Hubbard Jr. changed his name to Ron DeWolf, and then he, sued and back and forth between, against Scientology and Hubbard over the years and this and that. That he would cause trouble. He would get some kind of settlement from Scientology, and went back and forth. But in the 1950s, he was basically Hubbard's right-hand man, right, in London and in Saint Hill at the very beginning. Yeah.
Well, he also helped Bent Corridon write the book Madman or Messiah.
Yes,
That's
I remember that. I've got 2 copies of it, and he had a settlement. So the second copy, Nibs's name is removed.
Right.
Oh.
That's right. Yeah.
But when I worked in London, Nibs, I worked in London for some time as an auditor, and Nibs was director of processing, and this is one thing that is quite important there. When I first contacted Scientology, that was with my father, he put me on a little e-meter. But I took an HPA course after that. An HPA is the equivalent of an HCA, Hubbard Professional Auditor, or a Hubbard Certified Auditor. And on that course, which was in 55, was it? Yeah, I think it was in 55. There was no talk of an e-meter. We did auditing without an e-meter. But what happened was that I worked in Hazzy as an auditor, and Nibs was the director of processing. And one day in the middle of we had, this is the other interesting thing. You bought auditing in 25-hour portions, and they audited 25 hours in a week. So you would come in on Monday, and in the morning you would do tests, an OCA test or an APA, I suppose in America, and an intelligence test. In the afternoon, you'd have a 3-hour session. Bonk. After 3 hours, you'd stop. There was no question of an end phenomena. You'd had your dose for the day. And then on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, you audited 3 hours in the morning, or the auditor audited you 3 hours in the morning and 3 hours in the afternoon. And we had an hour for lunch. And I would sometimes go out to lunch. We would go out to lunch, buy a lunch locally in Tottenham Court Road. There was a cinema there where they had a restaurant. But it was, nowadays, you go to an end phenomena. You go to a floating needle and a cognition and so forth, and you end when you get that. But in those days, it was 3-hour blocks.
Right. Well, that's interesting because when I got involved on the ship, an intensive became 12 and a half hours, but each auditor, instead of the PC having to get 25 hours a week, each auditor had to deliver 25 hours a week.
Oh.
In order to be considered upstat, they had to get in at least 25 hours a week, and then they qualified for their bonuses and liberty.
No, yeah.
I wanted to show something too. You mentioned that you audited with an e-meter. You didn't before that. You didn't audit with an e-meter. I just wanted to show this photograph. This was Hubbard. Does he have an e-meter there? Maybe that's the wrong photo. But he did demonstrations. This is auditing. This is auditing without a meter. I mean, Hubbard is there on the right, and he's doing a demonstration for students. And the woman's laying down on a couch or whatever. But they audited without e-meters back before, doing Dianetics, right?
Yes, I had a friend here. He was an American who worked he worked for the American Army in Germany. He worked on e-meters. We worked together with e-meters, but he had been a demonstration pre-clear lying down with Ron there. So I value having known him.
Yeah. Cool.
But,
That's right.
Yeah.
Do you have another Nibs story you wanted to tell?
Yeah. Did I have what happened? I don't know whether I've just told you this. You can cut it and edit it. But the point was that one day, probably on a Tuesday or a Wednesday, before I went into session, now we started session at 9 o'clock, Nibs called me into his office and gave me an e-meter and said, use that.
But you didn't learn how to use it beforehand?
So when we audited in those days, there weren't any worksheets. Your admin was very minimal. You just write the start of session and the end of session and the times. And so I think it was very funny. I put it on the table and got the pre-clear to hold the cans, and we went through with it. And at the end of the session, I didn't know the hell what was doing with the e-meter. At the end of the session, the pre-clear said to me, I feel much more confident when you've got the e-meter there. And I felt a lot less confident.
So you didn't know what the needle reads were or anything like that?
No,
Yeah.
didn't have a clue.
Let me ask you a question. Back in those days, how did you know what processes to run on your pre-clear or whatever? Were you given an instruction as to what you were to do?
Yeah, but the usual instruction was that there was the latest process that came out, so we ran the latest processes, and I can remember. I've lost a little bit of continuity there because there was a set of processes, 4 processes called the CCHs.
Mm-hmm.
And the one bit, the number, they went round in a circle. There was a very special way of running them, which I was taught. I think it came out when I was in Dublin, but when I came back from Dublin, I started working in the Hazzie. And this is the interesting point. I got a pre-clear. He couldn't look you in the face. He sat there and he was moving his head all the time and never looking at you. So I ran this CCH 1 to 4. You ran it round and round, and in the middle there's one part of it where you put your hands up and make movements, and the pre-clear does the same movements. And I was doing this, and he was going like this all the time, and suddenly he looked at me. he was, he'd suddenly found me.
Wow. Wow.
And he couldn't go on, and I thought this was an end phenomena or something, but I couldn't go on. I couldn't go on with the next process, and at that time, we finished at 12 o'clock, and together we went to lunch in the restaurant. And while he wasn't really eating, he was just looking at me. It was fantastic, and well, that was that. But I heard later at a point when I'd been moved on to another post that he booked for another set of processes and wanted me as the auditor. But I'm afraid I can't produce miracles like that every day.
Right.
But the point which I'd like to make is that there is a special. Oh, there's another thing that happened. Years later, I'd been thrown out of the Church of Scientology, and a friend of mine, came over here to talk to me now and again, and he had a girlfriend, and the girlfriend. Well, what happened was rather dramatic. They slept together, and while they were both asleep, she woke up screaming. She got a hallucination, and she had this in daily life. She'd spent a lot of her childhood. She'd spent in the psychiatric hospital, so she wouldn't have been accepted by the Hazzie. But I accepted her, and I knew this way of running the CCHs. So I ran CCHs on her. I can't from memory say how many hours, but it was something like 20 or 30 hours, and got rid of this. And there's a process called opening procedure. I wanted to test whether I'd really got rid of this hallucination, because the point is, I ran this CCHs on her. The first one is, give me that hand. You sit there and you point your hand and say, give me that hand. That one went off all right. The second one, you stand on one side of the room, point to the other wall and say, look at that wall, and then go over to that wall. And as I said, look at that wall, she screamed, oh no, and fell on the sofa. I couldn't stop her or anything. And my head had become a wolf's head. So this was the state of the case. So I knew this CCH 1 to 4, how you ran it. And you ran it, it was a very precise way. And I don't know offhand how many hours, but it was about 30 hours or so. And I got rid of it. And I tested it, because there's another Scientology process which most hardened Scientologists know, called opening procedure by duplication.
Opro by dupe.
Yes.
And on that process, you have a book at one, probably an object, but a book on one end side of the room and a bottle at the other.
Yeah, it was also called book and bottle.
It's called book and bottle. You go over, and we ran that for 8 hours, and no wolf's head turned up. So, with that one process, I happened to have produced 2 miracles. One on a priest who couldn't look anybody in the face,
Right.
and the other was this person who got hallucinations. So
now,
yes,
that's great. Very good. And I have a question. When you write up that session, do you write that all up for I assume there was a case supervisor at that time who would then say whether to continue that process or go on to another process?
When I worked in the HASI, there was no case supervisor. There was an interesting thing when I worked at the HASI. This was in that building you saw there.
Yeah.
In the building, in the auditing rooms, up on the wall, there was a microphone. It was actually a walkie-talkie backwards and forwards. But that was connected up to the DFP's office and to L. Ron Hubbard's office, so that the DFP and L. Ron Hubbard could listen in to lectures, to auditing sessions.
Okay.
And in one of the rooms, the point was that when we ran a 25-hour intensive, Monday morning, the priest took a test, and we marked the test. The auditors got together and marked the test.
Mm-hmm.
And in the afternoon on Friday, they did a test, and we marked the test, and they had an interview with the DFP afterwards.
To see how the PC's doing.
Yeah, and you would see if there was a graph change, because they had these OCA graphs.
Right.
And I've gone off track here, but I was talking about the way the auditing rooms were there.
Right. And, and years later, like on the ship, Hubbard, when he was training auditors, he would actually have them go in session with a tape recorder, a little cassette player, and record their sessions. And then he would actually look at the worksheets while listening to the session in order to case supervise it and give the next instructions.
Oh, that's interesting.
And also to critique the auditors' TRs,
Yes.
communication skills. That was the other reason too, was to
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of cramming orders were written off of those.
That's very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because in the time when I was auditing in London, which would be 55, 56, there was nothing like cramming. There was no DFP. We just ran the standard processes to just the latest thing.
Right.
It was interesting because at that time, new processes kept coming out. And in fact, those processes were what are now the gradation chart. So you would have a whole bundle of new processes coming out concerning help. And so you get a bulletin coming out, and it would be another angle on help. and then later
Right.
on, there'd be the concentration would be on control, so that what you ran as an HPA, as an auditor, as a Hubbard HGC auditor, would be what came out in the latest bulletins.
I have a question. How would you know when a pre-clear was completed on a process? You know, like, was there, like, that's why Janice was asking about a case supervisor. Was there somebody to say, yeah, they've completed and move on to the next one? Or or was there something else that was done?
Nothing that I can remember.
So it was up to the auditor to decide whether the PC was done with that step
Yeah.
and should go on to the next one.
Yeah.
No examiners either.
There were no examiners, no.
So there was no red tags.
No, there were no red tags. I mean, I said there's also the other thing was that new term, when the bulletins that came out, he used to write bulletins, and new terms would appear in the bulletin, like a free needle. And we never got an explanation what a free needle was.
On an e-meter.
A floating
Right.
needle. The definitions came some years later. But that was the way it was going. He was working on different angles, which
Right.
did different levels on the grade chart. But the grade chart didn't exist. Grade chart came in the 60s.
Yeah, and I don't think the book of e-meter drills came out until the early 60s, and Mary Sue wrote that.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, it's funny, Ant, the way that what you're describing to me sounds like what it was like when Janice and I, you know, years later, Hubbard was developing new rundowns, and we were the guinea pigs, basically. You know what I mean? We're like, you know, here comes a new process to run it and see how it works, you know?
Yeah.
And so that happened. I mean, I remember being on the first happiness rundown and the first false purpose rundown and the purification rundown. You know,
Yeah.
before they were ever released to anybody else, we were the ones who received them.
Okay.
Right, Janice?
Yeah.
And that's how it was on the ship too, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He would come out with the new rundowns as a SIA, as the case supervisor, and tell auditors to do certain things, and then it would turn into a new rundown. And the same as correction lists. You know, he would
Oh, yeah.
do up a correction list and have that the PC taken in session to run the list and see what reads and take that up. And that's how, you know, different correction lists came out. Or got extended.
So Hubbard was constantly reviewing what was being done and trying to improve it. I mean, I'm for the never ends who are never watching this, right? I realize you don't understand or you would never experience it, but he constantly was trying to make it better and trying to improve it. So if somebody was having trouble, he would come up with a correction list to try and fix it, you know?
Right. And I brought up red tag. A red tag means that the pre-clear was not happy with the session. And I actually remember I never red tagged except for I was on the happiness rundown, and I don't know, it was just going the wrong direction, and the auditor just it was running me into the ground. And I remember going into the examiner, sitting down, picking up the cans and going, that was the worst session I have ever had. And I put down the cans and worked out. Within an hour, they had me back in running a correction list.
Yeah, because the thing is usually the person would red tag because of some auditor error, something missed, something that was missed. And the idea is you didn't want to miss it because it could make somebody, you know, spin in. So you wanted to make sure that you did it to what you talked about earlier, Ant, an end phenomenon, a cognition, a floating needle, like, oh my God, some new realization. And that would be the point where you would end the session, was like, oh, I'm feeling fantastic. Boy, that I never realized that before. That was the end phenomena really that you were going for every session, not somebody going like, yeah, that was okay. No.
Well, we didn't have that. We didn't have that. As I said, really, I don't. Looking back, when I was auditing, I had this one that went fantastic on the CCHs, but the other, I really didn't know. You know, it was just a grind.
Right.
As a
The,
things were
the
smart enough.
CCHs were rough. I mean, you know, when you talk about the book and the bottle and the opera, I mean, I know people who would do it, and it would really sort of, oh boy, it was a drudgery because you had to do it over and over and over and over again until you reach whatever the end phenomena was, right?
There was a time, a couple of the new messengers and also the musicians, the Apollo stars, Hubbard ordered them to 100 hours of book and bottle. And they twinned up and they did it, but I'm like, oh, thank God I'm never on that list.
Yeah, because the idea was that it was a control. I mean, it was basically learning to control your body and control things, you know, and that was it about. So doing it over and over again, you got to the point where you're like, okay, I got this. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That was
well,
sort
my mom used to drill on us kids when new bulletins would come down, or book and bottle, or the different CCHs. My mom used to have us kids come in and she would practice on us before she'd taken a paying PC. You know, so I remember doing the mimicking with her, and you know, and the book and bottle, and you know, going and walk over to that wall, touch that wall.
So you did a doll drill with a live doll.
Yeah, exactly. And just so people know, you would do drills with a doll sitting across from you rather than a real person to practice the process and procedure, rather than having somebody there, because they were afraid that if you had somebody sitting there, they would start running their own case while they were drilling with you. So you had a doll, like an actual stuffed animal or a doll there that you were.
I never did doll. I heard of doll drills, but I never did a doll drill.
Yeah. Hey, you know, it's just I had a realization, you know, now that we're talking, and this is not off the subject, but just a realization. It's funny. I realized Hubbard was constantly trying to improve things in his mind. I'm looking at it from his point of view. He constantly was trying to make things better for the pre-clear, or for the person receiving the processing, to achieve higher levels. That was his mentality of what he was trying to do. Then he died. He's gone, right? So there was, you know, Miscavige and all of them were thinking like, we've only got what we got. And, you know, like they came out with OT8, but then they've never come out with OTs 9, 10, and 11, right? Because they never really put it together, and they've never really thought about it. But it's interesting because I know people like you, Ant, and Roger Baswava, and Alan Walter and all that. You guys have continued looking for greater levels of spiritual enlightenment, right, through doing your own experiment processing that Hubbard used to do. Am I right?
Well, you know, I don't. I've only invented one process.
Was it Roger that was doing that? Roger Baswava and Alan Walter, right?
Roger. Probably that sounds more like Roger.
And then Captain Bill and his OT40 or whatever, right? I mean, all these people just continued using themselves and other people to try and, you know, achieve these things.
My viewpoint really is that what we've got is more than enough. If you use it with a little bit of expertise.
Right.
There's such a wealth of stuff there. It's got to be the right thing in the right place. That's the problem.
Yeah. And do you still audit to this day? Do you still audit other people or audit yourself? What do you do?
I've sort of cooled down a minute, but I want to start again.
But you did for years, right? You continued to audit.
I audited over there. Oh, well, I'll say this. I got thrown out of the church in '83, and I think the reason I never got told why, But I think the
David
reason
Miscavige,
why I
I'm
got
sure.
thrown out was because I had taken the Happiness Rundown course, and the Happiness Rundown course gave me the fundamentals of auditing. And when I came out, I've got a flat here, and I audited people who did jobs in the flat. Here's a Happiness Rundown, who did jobs in the flat as in return for auditing on them. So when I audited in the HGC in London, I don't think I got much. I don't think I was much good. But when I audited here, there's been some marvelous. This is outside of the church. There's been some marvelous results. I could go in a bit. I had a man who had a really brutal father. I ordered this out of him, and the father was SP squared, and there's various things. And then I've had 2 or 3 people who had a parent who was ridiculous, and you just have to audit the incidents that come up out. The other thing, of course, is that I myself had cancer. I had cancer on my penis that kept repeating, and when it got to a level where they cut the end of the penis off, I said, well, this is enough. So I got an auditor to audit all the incidents they could find in my child. I've got lots of them in my childhood concerning sex and penis and so forth. For 5 years, I went to the hospital again to check whether it come back. And they've stopped bothering to check. So
because it didn't come back.
You've got the solution to, but I mean, it's got to be done expertly.
Yeah.
Right.
Now, Janice, remind me, the Happiness Rundown has to do with the Way to Happiness booklet, like you're actually auditing
Yes.
based off the Way to Happiness booklet, the different precepts in there.
Yeah.
Don't be honest and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And you know what's funny? When Hubbard wrote that and released it and I read it, I was all excited about the Way to Happiness because I thought finally people are going to be treated decently. But it didn't happen.
I'll tell you something. I did the internship to the Happiness Rundown, the course and internship in 1983, I think in the beginning. And for pre-clears, I got some people who, the trouble is, you have a scale of things in Scientology, and you have to have a CS who was a level that is your level or higher. And they didn't have a CS who could CS people who were OT3. So although I was supposedly OT3, I couldn't audit OT3. So I got the lower class people from the Guardian's office, and I got somebody to read out from the Way to Happiness, get rest. And she looked at me in astonishment saying, did Hubbard say that?
Didn't practice it, but yeah.
It's pitiful.
It also said clean your teeth and take care of your teeth, your dental hygiene,
But I mean, this is the point on there. Hubbard was, to my knowledge, Hubbard was alone with 2 Scientologists when he wrote The Way to Happiness.
Yes.
He was keyed out from all the problems of running
management.
Management. And I've got a big, a big bee in my bonnet about that, because I think it's a marvelous thing. I've run it. I've got a lot of good successes with that.
Yeah. Well, and funny you bring that up, because I remember anytime Hubbard got involved in management, oh, his mood would totally change and he'd be yelling and screaming, where if he was away from management because he was hiding somewhere and couldn't manage or see what's happening, he was calm.
Yeah.
There was always a big difference in his personality.
I would say the other thing is, now I don't know a lot about Hubbard, but there were two instances where he was cut off. The one was when he wrote the Happiness Rundown and instructed David Mayo how to do that.
Right.
And the other one was when he wrote Science of Survival. So Science of Survival it's beyond me, but it's a genius work. And he was cut off he lost control of Scientology. So he was sitting there not having anything to do, and he wrote this fantastic book.
Right.
It's interesting what you said about that.
Yeah, Science of Survival was written in the 1950s, and it was considered book 2, right? Book 1 was Dianetics, and book 2 was Science of Survival, and that was about the tone scale, the emotional tone scale.
Yeah.
That's the premise of the book, Science of Survival.
Yeah. Well, it's beyond me. It's complex, but the chart of human evaluation and the chart of attitudes, you begin to look at that and you see how it all fits in. It's like a jigsaw, an enormous jigsaw puzzle, and all the pieces are put exactly in the right place. He may have gone a bit bonkers on homosexuality, but I mean, I don't think there's anything in this universe that is flawless.
Now, let me ask you, Ant, since we're talking about 1983, 82 with the Happiness Rundown, you said that you got removed from the Church of Scientology at those time. Do you remember where were you and why was that done? Do you know?
Well, I took. Yes, I know it. I know it. My next step, I ran out of money, and my next step, this is what happened. My next step was to get another level, but I had enough money left. You had to have a sec check before you started every new level. This is all the red tape of the thing. So I went in and got my sec check. So, and used the last of my money. And they kept me waiting for a DFP interview for an hour. And I was a bit desperate because it was too much. So I actually, it's a big joke, because I'd waited an hour for this DFP interview. And I went up to someone there and said, if this was flag, I'd never have to wait this long.
Where was this?
I said, if I'd gone to flags, I would never have had to wait this long, because we'd been told how marvelous it was in flag and everything. See? But
where were you? Where were you? Were you in Were you in Denmark, or were you in London, or where were you?
No, this was Denmark. AOSH. What happened was, now I had ARC broken. Policy letter says that you take the pre-clear into session and handle the ARC break. I got sent to Qual. Qual got me to write up my overts and withholds. And for 3 days I was writing up my overts and withholds and going to HCO and seeing an HCO telling me, this isn't good enough, do it again. So then the HCO exec sec, this all gets complicated with their framework and so forth. Right. People who don't know it won't know what it means. But anyway, the HCO sec came up behind me rather and said, "You're not paying for this. We'll send you to the Deck Project Force, which is FOLO or ULO, which is another org. It was an organization for handling the Scientology churches in South Africa and Europe.
Management of them, yes.
So I went there, and I wasn't a staff member. It was only staff members who went there, but they put me on this, and I was trying to earn some money. It was a mess, but I went there part-time, and I went in one day, and it was irregular for me to be there because I wasn't a staff member, and it was irregular because I was going in between other jobs, sort of thing. But I went in there one day and sat down to write my overts and withholds for them. And the course supervisor said, "I want you to give me a target for how many pages of overts and withholds you will write up." And I looked at him, and he sent me to ethics. I looked at him in amazement, and he sent me to ethics. And ethics told me, I've got a overt. You must go out of here and don't talk to anyone until you come in and tell me what your overt is." So,
wow.
I mean, the point was that at that time I was in a very badly paid job. I was a night person on a taxi firm, which didn't have any taxis at night.
Right.
Getting paid very well, so I was busy looking for another job. So I continued looking for another job, and fortunately I got one. And then this was in March '83. In June '83, I should explain something else. I have a flat here, and I've had a spare bed where I've had various people, students, sleeping. And a man a New Zealand man, sent me, have you heard of the Dane Tops letter?
Yes, I have heard of that.
But he sent me the Dane Tops letter. Came through my letterbox, which still had letterboxes in those days. And that told me, well, that's how I discovered, that's how the Dane Tops letter came to Denmark, as far as I know. But anyway, that started.
Well, people don't know what the Dane Tops letter is, and I didn't either until I met the person who wrote it, and I'm like, what is the Dane Tops letter? And apparently it was a letter of disaffection about what was going on in Scientology. And they had sent that out. It was kind of like a Debbie Cook letter, but it was written before Debbie Cook did her letter. And the person who wrote it used the name of Dane Top. And that's what that is. But I want to just go back to something earlier, just so that the viewers can understand.
Yeah.
When Ant said ARC break, that means a break in affinity, reality, and communication. And it basically means you had an upset.
Yeah.
And then, so what you're saying, Ant, is not only did you have an upset, you also had a PTP, a present time problem.
I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah, no job. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, you've indicated some bad thoughts.
And then, Janice, the other part of this too. This is March 1983. This is the height of the International Finance Police and the mission holder. The heavy ethics period, and them getting rid of anybody who was disaffected with David Miscavige in management.
Exactly. Including me. I mean, I was out chasing gophers at that time for my disaffection.
I was in the Rehabilitation Project Force.
And I was even offloaded and declared, and then I was brought back declared, But yeah, that's a whole nother story. But
Yeah.
it was a heavy duty scene that time period that you went
So
through.
did they kick you out? Did they kick you out? Is that what happened?
Well, I wasn't in. I mean, I was living at home.
But I mean, at some point they said, don't come back, or what happened?
They said, all this ethics officer said was, go out, don't talk to anybody, and come back when you when you found out what your big overt is. It doesn't
So you
make
never came
sense.
back? So you never came back?
What?
So you never came back? Is that what happened?
Well, what happened was this was in March 1983. What happened was that I continued trying to get a job, which previously I've been trying to get customers, because I was going to sell people. This was so unrealistic, but I was going to sell people Scientology admin tech. I was looking for people with businesses who could apply this too. But instead of so I was going to the library and looking up likely people. So I continued going to the library and looked up likely people who would want somebody who could do printing work. So I did get a job. It was the time when copy machines were new, or fairly new, Xerox machine and so forth.
Right.
So I found a firm who were it was an engineering firm who were making these large blueprints. They used to call it blueprints in English.
Yeah.
And I got a job with them, and that there's somebody watching me and steering me. But the point was, I got this Dane Tops letter, and with that, I got in contact with some other people, and we started something which we called the European Information Center, sending out these messages we got a mailing list, and the place where I got a job also had one of these Xerox machines. So when I did any overtime, they paid me the overtime by letting me photocopy these things, which we sent out to the mailing list. The thing we ran was called, in English, it's called the European Information Center, but the name was the Europees Information Center, DEI. This is extending beyond our time a bit, but that was when things got exciting, and I call it free Scientology, because free FRI is the name. When I came to Denmark, there was a lot of talk about free abortion, and free abortion means legal abortion. So we were using legal Scientology, so to speak, free Scientology.
So you basically were disseminating this Dane whatever letter to other people in Scientology, right?
Yeah.
So then did they then say, well, we're declaring you a suppressive person and kick you out? Is that what happened?
I can't, no, what happened was that I met this person. There's a bit of a story was missing here. When I got the Dane Tops letter, I knew someone who had also been thrown out. So I went with this letter to him, and he was away. He was coming back from work, so his wife looked at it. But when he came back, he looked at it rather hastily and said to me, if you send this to anybody, don't put your return address. I think he was a hole in the head. But I'm susceptible to people with a hole in the head. So I sent it out to 5 people. without my return address. And someone rang back the next day saying, was it me? This was someone, yeah. And from that, the thing, the thing blossomed. So we got people going.
But we're going to have to end off the show here in a bit. But I just wanted to find out: did you get kicked out, or what happened? Like, what was the end of this?
Well, you've seen the end of it.
Oh, you disappeared.
The church ethics officer said I wasn't to come back to them until I'd found the big overt.
I got it. Okay.
So
and obviously there was no big.
Another thing odd.
Sorry.
I got someone. There was a group that talked about these things, and one of the things we said we found out was that if somebody from the org wanted to visit you, I can't remember exactly how it went, but when somebody did ring me up and asked me if they would come, they said, I want to bring someone with me. So I said, yes, it's all right if you let me record it. And I heard no more. I heard there was somebody in South Africa who had a visit which lasted 9 hours. There was 2 people from Scientology kept her talking for 9 hours. I mean, in those days, well, you could say all hell was breaking loose.
Yeah.
But it was chaotic. But that gives you an idea. I think we better order end now.
Yeah, no, we're going to end it off here. So those are some great stories, and we're going to have you back again, right, Janice?
Okay.
Yes, we are. When I get back from cruising, we will have you back.
Yeah, have a good idea. Have a good cruise.
I will.
And, hold on a second, Ant. I'm going to go ahead and finish this off here.
Yes,
and we'll talk to you on the other side. We want to thank everybody for watching this interview with Ant, and please subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. Hit that like button, hit that notification button so you know when other videos come out. If you have any questions or comments about what we talked about, go down below, comment away. Questions, ask us any questions, and we'll relay them to Ant. And we look forward to hearing from you. If you'd like to support the channel, of course, buy us a coffee. There's a link in the description. And also, Janice, if you're interested in Qualicom, there's a link right down there below. You can order it. It's a great way to de-stress, get some good night's sleep and all that. Qualicom. Go down and click on that link, and you can learn about it, and you can order it from our merchandise store. Janice and Ant, anything else before I end off here?
No, I'm exhausted. I'm ready for another thing in a few weeks' time.
Yeah. Well,
Okay,
I
great.
enjoyed this, Ant. I enjoyed it a lot. So I look forward to the next one.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Okay, everybody.
Bye.
Until next time, bye-bye.